For 25 years, Brightview Senior Living Associates have been committed to creating a vibrant culture and delivering exceptional services, making Brightview a great place to work and live. If you're looking for a rewarding opportunity to serve your local community and grow, we want you to join our team. Brightview Senior Living is growing and actively seeking vibrant associates to join our community teams, including directors, healthcare, activities, hospitality, and dining. Apply today at careers.brightviewseniorliving.com. Equal employment opportunities. Text BV Jobs to 97211 to apply.
Pura is the smart way to fragrance your home. Customize your scents with app control, schedule them to fit your life, and enjoy premium fragrances that last. And here's something to celebrate. When you start today, your first fragrance is free. It's the perfect time to discover why everyone's switching to Pura. But hurry, this offer is for a limited time only. Go now to Pura.com and claim your free set before it's gone.
Ya vienen los touchdowns. ¿Estás listo? Esta temporada de la NFL convierte las jugadas grandes en premios con DraftKings Sportsbook, un socio oficial de apuestas deportivas de la NFL. Descarga la app de DraftKings Sportsbook y usa el código HEART. Ese es el código HEART para recibir $200 en bonus bets al instante cuando hagas tu primera apuesta de $5. En colaboración con DraftKings, la corona es tuya. ¿Problemas con el juego? Llama al 1-800-GAMBLER. En Nueva York, llama al 877-8-HOPE-NY o envía un mensaje de texto con la palabra HOPE-NY al 467-369. En Connecticut, hay ayuda disponible para problemas con el juego. Llama al 888-789-7777 o visita ccpg.org. Juega responsablemente. En nombre de Boot Hill Casino and Resort, Kansas. Debe ser mayor de 21 años. Pueden aplicarse cargos en Illinois. La elegibilidad varía según la jurisdicción. No válido en Ontario. Las apuestas de bono son de un solo uso. La apuesta no se incluye en las ganancias y caducan después de ser otorgadas. La oferta finaliza el 29 de septiembre 2025 a las 11:59 p.m. hora del este. Los términos en DraftKings.com/sportsbook/promos.
Pura brings smart fragrance and function together. Premium scents, smart app control, and sleek design. And here's the best part. Your first set of fragrances is free. Hurry to Pura.com now and upgrade your home today.
Just a quick heads up, this is part 2 of the 2-part story, so if you haven't listened to the first part, you may want to go back and take a listen. When the bloodshed finally stopped in 1985, Florentine authorities were left with a case as cold and confounding as any in criminal history. A special anti-monster task force was formed, and the investigation quickly became one of the most extensive and expensive Italy had ever seen. Over the years, more than 100,000 men were investigated. Dozens of suspects were interrogated or arrested, and scores of lives were ruined by suspicion and rumour. Detectives chased lead after lead, some credible, some utterly bizarre. There were even seances in cemeteries, as if desperate officials or citizens turned to the supernatural for guidance. From the late 1980s through the 1990s, the monster investigation took on a life of its own, metastasizing into a saga of judicial blunders, media frenzy, and wild conspiracy theories. It seemed that the monster, even in absentia, had shown seeds of madness that would corrupt the very quest to find him. I'm Sarah Powell, and this is Obscurata, because some stories have no ending. One of the earliest theories to grip investigators was the so-called Sardinian Trail. This theory arose from the connections around the monster's first known victim, Barbara Locke. Locke and several of her lovers were Sardinian, and her cuckolded husband, Stefano Mele, also from Sardinia, had thrown suspicion on his wife's family and acquaintances with his inconsistent statements. In the wake of the 1982 and 1983 murders, police actually tried a risky bluff. They leaked a false story to the press, claiming that survivor Paolo Mainardi had briefly regained consciousness and named his attacker. The hope was to spook the real killer or prompt an accomplice to slip up. The gambit worked better than expected. Shortly thereafter, an anonymous tipster, signing as a friendly citizen, urged authorities to re-examine the old 1968 Lockie murder. That clue led to the discovery of the misfiled bullets in Mele's case file and confirmed the link across all the murders. With Stefano Mele disqualified as sole perpetrator, he was imprisoned during later killings. Investigators turned their gaze on Lockie's past lovers and any Sardinian with a grudge or connection. In 1983, police arrested Francesco Vinci, one of Lockie's former lovers, after noting that he had hidden his car on the night of a monster murder. Vinci spent over a year in custody. Inconveniently for the police, the monster murders continued while he was locked up, including the 1984 double homicide. Undeterred by this obvious hole in their theory, an examining magistrate widened the Sardinian net. By 1984, Mele's own brother, Giovanni, and brother-in-law, Piero Musciarini, were also arrested. For a time, 3 Sardinian suspects sat in prison at once. Yet the monster struck again in July 1984, practically alibying all of them. Embarrassed, authorities released the men. Attention then pivoted to the most enigmatic figure on the Sardinian trail, Salvatore Vinci, Francesco's brother and another of Lockie's reputed lovers. Salvatore had a dark cloud in his past. Years before, back in Sardinia, his young wife had died in a suspicious house fire that was officially ruled a suicide. Gossip suggested Salvatore might have murdered her. Latching onto this, in 1985, after the final monster killing, Magistrate Mario Rotella arranged Salvatore Vinci's extradition to Sardinia to stand trial for his wife's long-ago death. The plan, never explicitly stated, seemed to be to crack Salvatore on the old murder and hope he'd implicate himself or the others in the monster spree. It failed spectacularly. Salvatore was acquitted of his wife's murder, walking out a free man. By 1989, the entire Sardinian trail had unravelled. The chief prosecutor in Florence, Pier Luigi Vigna, publicly declared that line of inquiry exhausted, conceding that perhaps the monster's gun had passed into different hands after 1968. After years of roundups and dead ends, all the Sardinian suspects were officially cleared. In hindsight, this phase of the investigation felt like a tragic farce. Innocent men jailed, while the real killer roamed free. Evidence misplaced or ignored, and precious time lost. However, a new lead was on the horizon, one driven by emerging computer analysis and an exhaustive cross-referencing of profiles. By the late 1980s, authorities painstakingly compiled a database of thousands of gun owners, sex offenders, peeping toms, and anyone who might fit the monster's psychological portrait. Into this dragnet fell a name that would soon dominate headlines: Pietro Paccaccini. Paccaccini was a grizzled Tuscan farmhand with a violent history and an unsettling demeanour. Decades earlier, in 1951, he'd been convicted of a particularly heinous murder, catching his fiancée with another man. Paccaccini savagely stabbed the man to death and allegedly forced the woman to violate the corpse, a crime for which he served 13 years. More recently, he'd been convicted of raping his own daughters and abusing his wife. He was, in short, fully capable of brutal violence. Paccaccini also happened to live in the town of San Casciano, not far from several murder sites, and was known to poach in the woods at night. Investigators like Inspector Ruggiero Perugini grew convinced that they had found their monster. In 1991, Paccaccini's property was searched high and low. Amid the junk in his garden, police triumphantly claimed to have found an unfired Winchester Series H bullet, the same brand as used by the monster. They also pointed to curious items in his home, like a reproduction of Botticelli's painting, Primavera, depicting a ritualistic scene of flora and flesh, and some crude artwork that Paccaccini had painted, which authorities interpreted as possibly symbolic of the crimes. These pieces of evidence were circumstantial at best. In fact, that lone bullet found buried in his yard would later turn out to be planted by overzealous police, a disgraceful attempt to fabricate physical evidence. Nonetheless, the case against Paccaccini moved forward. In 1994, Pietro Paccaccini was indicted and put on trial in Florence for 7 of the 8 double murders, all except the 1968 killings. The trial transfixed Italy. Here in the dock sat a squat, uneducated contadino, a peasant farmer, being accused of outwitting the entire Carabinieri for 2 decades and committing some of the most notorious crimes in Italian history. The prosecution painted Paccaccini as a lust-driven maniac, citing his past homicide and sexual crimes as proof of a murderous depravity. They argued that his 1951 stabbing rampage showed a pattern of attacking couples and mutilating a male rival, a supposed prelude to the later crimes. The media, for its part, seized upon Paccaccini's unsavoury character. He was dubbed Il Vampa, the Fireflesh or Fiery One, a nickname from his youth, and depicted as the archetypal country monster. In a dramatic verdict, the court found Paccaccini guilty, sentencing him to 14 life terms, 1 for each life lost. Crowds outside the courthouse cheered. After nearly 10 years of fear and frustration, it seemed that the monster of Florence had finally been caged. Yet the sense of closure was short-lived. Paccaccini's defence appealed, and in 1996, a higher court acquitted him, citing woefully insufficient evidence. The appellate judges agreed that the case against Paccaccini was embarrassingly thin, essentially a patchwork of character assassinations, dubious witness recollections, and that suspect garden bullet. The supposed proof, like the Botticelli painting or Paccaccini's stash of erotic drawings, hardly amounted to hard evidence of serial murder. In fact, the appeal judge criticised investigators for tunnel vision and sloppy work. Paccaccini, then in his late 60s and in poor health, walked free pending a retrial. The public was flabbergasted. How could the alleged monster be let loose? Under immense pressure, prosecutors vowed to try Puccini again. Italy's Supreme Court of Cassation soon ordered a new trial, maintaining that the acquittal might have been in error. But fate intervened. In February of 1998, before he could be retried, Pietro Puccini died at home of an apparent heart attack. He was 73. Many said that this was too convenient, that perhaps the old man had been silenced by the real culprits, by a poison or drugs, to ensure he took their secrets to the grave. Indeed, years later, one magistrate would assert that Puccini's death was suspicious and likely induced by persons unknown. If Puccini carried any truths about the monster case, they were buried with him in the Tuscan soil. However, the authorities were not ready to abandon their narrative. Even as Puccini's own fate seesawed in the courts, prosecutors had developed a new theory. Puccini did not act alone. Perhaps, they posited, the monster of Florence was not a single killer, but a pack of them, accomplices who hunted together. This premise gained traction after 1996, once Puccini was briefly free. Investigators turned their focus to two of Puccini's drinking buddies, Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti. These men were, like Puccini, local bumpkins of unsavoury repute. Vanni was a lean, elderly postman. Lotti, a shy, mentally slow man who did odd jobs. They often socialised with Puccini, sharing cheap wine and gossip in what was described as a twilight world, semi-literate peasants. In 1996, during Puccini's first appeal, Giancarlo Lotti suddenly came forward with a story. He claimed he'd been lurking in the bushes on the night of the 1985 French couple murders and had seen Puccini and Vanni commit the crime. Lotti's account was inconsistent and filled with holes, but once he placed himself at a murder scene, investigators pushed him harder. Over multiple interrogations, Lotti's tale evolved into a partial confession. He eventually admitted that he, Vanni and Puccini were all involved in the monster slayings. According to Lotti's later statements, he was a reluctant participant who helped subdue victims, while Puccini pulled the trigger and performed the mutilations, and Vanni acted as a lookout or helper. In one version, Lotti even claimed that after some murders, he saw Puccini cook and eat a piece of a female victim's flesh. Lotti's stories changed repeatedly. At different times, he cited different motives. At one point, suggesting Puccini had wanted to collect female genitalia as fetishes to feed his daughters for some twisted reason. Another time, Lotti claimed the murders were simply crimes of opportunity, couples caught in sexual acts that enraged prudish, violent Puccini. His most damning assertion, however, hinted at something more sinister, a shadowy doctor figure who had allegedly hired Puccini and company to harvest body parts. This claim would soon take the case in a startling new direction. Despite the dubious quality of Lotti's testimony, prosecutors leaned on it heavily. In 1997 to 98, Vanni and Lotti were formally charged as Puccini's accomplices in multiple murders. Their trial unfolded in the late 1990s. was another media spectacle. Now elderly and confused, Mario Vanni famously protested in court, "We were only picnic buddies," insisting that his friendship with Puccini was innocent, merely two old men sharing snacks and wine together. The phrase snack buddies became an Italian pop culture catchphrase, emblematic of absurd criminal defences. The jury, however, didn't buy Vanni's pleas. In 1998, both Vanni and Lotti were convicted. Vanni received life in prison, and Lotti got 30 years, later reduced to 26 on appeal. A fourth accused accomplice, Giovanni Vaghi, was acquitted for lack of evidence. When the Italian Supreme Court upheld Vanni and Lotti's convictions in 2000, officials declared that the monster case was essentially solved. At least 5 of the 8 double murders were pinned on this ragtag trio of old men from the Tuscan countryside. Yet many observers remained profoundly uneasy. The convictions were based almost entirely on witness testimonies and confessions extracted under pressure, with no physical evidence linking the accused to the crime scenes. There was not a single fingerprint, hair or DNA sample was ever found implicating Puccini, Vanni or Lotti. The notorious Beretta pistol itself was never recovered. The mutilated body parts, supposedly taken as trophies or for whatever other purpose, were never found either, except for the one severed breast mailed to prosecutors in 1985, which proved nothing about who did it. If Puccini and friends were the monsters, where were the spoils of their depravity? How had these uncouth labourers managed to hide or destroy all the evidence so perfectly for years? The whole scenario struck many as implausible. Both Italian and international media questioned whether the authorities had truly caught the monster or merely scapegoated a convenient set of local uglies, who fit the part. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, as the primary monster trials concluded, a dramatic new theory emerged from the periphery, a theory that dragged the case into the murky realm of conspiracy and the occult. Italy, like much of the world, had experienced its share of satanic panic during the 1980s and 90s. In the Monster of Florence case, such ideas had always fluttered at the margins. How could they not, given the quasi-ritualistic nature of the murders? Some saw a perverse pattern that hinted at black magic or occult rituals. During Puccini's home search, investigators did find a few dog-eared books on black magic and Satanism in his possession, and both Puccini and Vanni were known to have associated with a curious character, Salvatore Indovino, a self-styled occultist and fortune-teller who hosted gatherings at a farmhouse outside San Cassiano. Locals whispered that Indovino's place was the scene of orgies and possibly dark rites. It was said goats were sacrificed and participants engaged in bizarre pseudo-Masonic ceremonies. These hints of devilry were largely ignored during the trials, considered too far-fetched or irrelevant. But some investigators kept wondering if the monster killings had a deeper motive beyond the twisted lust of a few peasants. One of those investigators was Michele Guittari, the lead inspector of a new task force, nicknamed Guides, formed in the late 1990s to continue pursuing the monster case. By 2001, Guittari publicly announced a bombshell. He believed the monster crimes were ordered by a satanic cult operating in Florence. This cult, he suggested, comprised wealthy and powerful individuals who had recruited lower-class men like Piccini to do their dirty work, specifically to murder couples and harvest female body parts for use in occult rituals. Guattari pointed out that Piccini had unusually large savings during the years of the murders, over €117,000 by the 1990s, along with property and a car. Guattari suggested this was evidence of secret paymasters funding the killings for occult purposes. Later reviews found no proof of such payments. Critics argued Piccini simply hoarded money from work and petty dealings. Likewise, Mario Vanni had a healthy bank account, despite his modest postman's pension. To true believers in the cult theory, these were payoffs from the sect. Skeptics countered that Piccini was notoriously stingy and had squirreled away money from odd jobs and perhaps theft. Nothing supernatural about it. And Lotti, notably, remained dirt poor until his arrest, hardly the mark of a well-paid contract killer. But Guattari pressed on. He even noted finding a small pyramidal stone near a villa where Piccini once worked as a gardener, which he fancifully interpreted as a witchcraft symbol. An idea journalist like Spezzi openly mocked, noting that such stones were common doorsteps in Tuscany. Enter Giuliano Maggini, a magistrate, who would later gain infamy as the prosecutor in the Amanda Knox case. Maggini teamed up with Guattari, and together they spun an elaborate hypothesis that went far beyond the trio of snack buddies. Central to this theory were two new names, Francesco Calamandre and Dr. Francesco Narducci. Calamandre was a respected pharmacist from a town near Florence. Narducci was a wealthy physician. Maggini became convinced that these two men were high-ranking cult members, perhaps even ringleaders, who had orchestrated the monster murders. According to his theory, Dr. Narducci was the one who kept the female body parts for the cult's black masses. No court ever found evidence for this claim, and it was formally rejected in 2010. In other words, Piccini and his cronies were just hitmen. The real motive was witchcraft, and the real culprits were genteel devil worshippers in positions of influence. It sounded like a fever dream, but Maggini was deadly serious. Why Narducci? Part of the reasoning was that Narducci himself had died under mysterious circumstances. In October 1985, barely a month after the last monster murder, Dr. Francesco Narducci was found dead in Lake Trasimeno, near Perugia. At the time, it was ruled a suicide or accident after an overdose of Demerol was mentioned and considered unrelated to the Florence killings. But in 2001, Maggini reopened the Narducci case with a vengeance, acting on what he claimed were intercepted conversations hinting at a cover-up. Maggini had Narducci's body exhumed. To considerable shock, the new autopsy reportedly found signs consistent with strangulation, not drowning. Maggini alleged that the corpse recovered in 1985 wasn't even Narducci's, that some body double switch had occurred to conceal the true manner of death. This theory was never substantiated and was later dismissed in court. Maggini hypothesized an almost absurdly complex plot. Narducci, being the custodian of the monster's gruesome trophies, was eliminated by his fellow cultists once the murders ended, perhaps because he posed a risk or wanted out. Then the fake body was swapped in to stage a suicide, with local authorities complicit. This scenario was later deemed unfounded. The conspiracy theory implicated not only the supposed cultists, but also 20 people, including police officers and officials, whom McGeaney claimed helped cover up Narducci's murder and the cult's existence. In 2002 to 2004, emboldened by Guattari's investigative support, McGeaney ordered a series of dramatic actions. He had the Narducci family investigated for conspiracy and evidence tampering. He named pharmacist Calamandre as an alleged sect member and actually put him on trial under a special procedure, though no conviction resulted. Police conducted surprise raids on the homes of some very prominent figures, including Aurelio Metti, a psychologist working for Italy's SISDE Secret Service, and Francesco Bruno, the country's leading criminal profiler. Both men had been consultants in the original monster investigation, and Bruno in particular had earlier authored a 1985 report theorising an occult motive, a report that was strangely filed away and never given to police at the time. McGeaney suspected that Mattei and Bruno, perhaps on behalf of Secret Service superiors, had suppressed evidence of the cult. He seized their computers, notebooks, anything that might hint at hidden knowledge. The Italian press had a field day with these revelations. What had already been a sensational case now morphed into something out of the Da Vinci Code. Secret societies, black masses under the Tuscan moon, high-ranking conspirators covering up the truth. These accusations were never substantiated. The raids yielded nothing and the men were cleared. In 2006, as part of this escalating saga, McGeaney's investigation took an even stranger turn against two men who arguably knew the monster case better than anyone. Journalist Mario Spezzi and American author Douglas Preston. Spezzi, recall, had been on the case since 1981 and co-wrote a best-selling book about it with Preston. The two had publicly criticised McGeaney's cult theory as ridiculous. In retaliation or out of paranoia, McGeaney had Mario Spezzi arrested, accusing him of somehow being an accessory to the monster murders or part of the conspiracy trying to derail the investigation. Preston was interrogated as well and narrowly avoided arrest by fleeing Italy. The accusations quickly collapsed. Spezzi was released after an international outcry, and all charges against both men were dismissed. The situation had descended into farce. The investigator McGeaney seemed to see monsters everywhere he looked. Under this cloud of fear and absurdity, Spezzi spent weeks in prison until the international outcry forced his release and led to these charges being tossed out. Not long after, both McGeaney and Guattari themselves were formally indicted for abuse of office, essentially accused of overstepping the bounds of the law in their zeal to prove a satanic conspiracy. The once vaunted Guides Task Force was disbanded. Finally, in 2010, an Italian judge put a decisive end to the wildest chapter of the monster murders. Judge Paolo Michelli presided over a hearing to evaluate McGeaney's sweeping indictments against the supposed 20-person sect and their alleged cover-up of Narducci's murder. He threw the case out in its entirety. There was, he ruled, no solid evidence of any satanic sect or that Narducci's death was anything more than what it appeared, a suicide or accident. The intricate tale of the body swaps and secret devotees of the devil was dismissed as a fantasy built on conjecture. Douglas Preston remarked, The prosecutor's malicious and unfounded accusations had ruined many lives and impoverished families for years. By that point, McGeeney's satanic allegations had ensnared 23 different people, none of which ever held up in court. McGeeney himself was convicted in 2010 of abusing his office during the monster investigations, though he, remarkably, remained in his job for some time, despite the stain on his record. As for the specific individuals targeted in the cult theory, Calamandre, the pharmacist, was fully exonerated. The late Dr. Narducci's name was cleared posthumously, and the entire narrative of a wealthy satanic cabal behind the monster of Florence was left in ashes.
Ya vienen los touchdowns. ¿Estás listo? Esta temporada de la NFL convierte las jugadas grandes en premios con DraftKings Sportsbook, un socio oficial de apuestas deportivas de la NFL. Descarga la app de DraftKings Sportsbook y usa el código HEART. Ese es el código HEART para recibir $200 en bonus bets al instante cuando hagas tu primera apuesta de $5. En colaboración con DraftKings, la corona es tuya. ¿Problemas con el juego? Llama al 1-800-GAMBLER. En Nueva York, llama al 877-8-HOPE-NY o envía un mensaje de texto con la palabra HOPE-NY al 467-369. En Connecticut, hay ayuda disponible para problemas con el juego. Llama al 888-789-7777 o visita ccpg.org. Juega responsablemente. En nombre de Boot Hill Casino and Resort, Kansas. Debe ser mayor de 21 años. Pueden aplicarse cargos en Illinois. La elegibilidad varía según la jurisdicción. No válido en Ontario. Las apuestas de bono son de un solo uso. La apuesta no se incluye en las ganancias y caducan después de ser otorgadas. La oferta finaliza el 29 de septiembre 2025 a las 11:59 p.m. hora del este. Los términos en DraftKings.com/sportsbook/promos.
Pura brings smart fragrance and function together. Premium scents, smart app control, and sleek design. And here's the best part. Your first set of fragrances is free. Hurry to Pura.com now and upgrade your home today.
Today, the Monster of Florence case remains officially unsolved. Yes, there were convictions. 2 men, Vanni and Lottie, languished in prison for the crimes. Vanni died in 2009, maintaining his innocence to the end. Lottie died in 2002, during his sentence. But the Italian justice system never delivered a clear, satisfying answer. Pietro Piccini, the central figure, died a free man, neither officially guilty nor officially innocent in the eyes of the law. No one has ever been convicted for all of the monster murders. At best, the courts pinned 4 of the 8 double homicides on the snack buddies, leaving the rest technically unresolved. This legal limbo means that the case is technically open, and every few years there's a flutter of activity. A new tip, a DNA test on old evidence, talk of advanced ballistics reanalysis. In one recent instance, investigators quietly re-examined genetic material from a 1980s crime scene, hoping against hope for a database hit. But so far, these efforts have yielded nothing conclusive. The monster, it seems, has taken his secrets to the grave, whichever grave that may be. And that is the end of this story, and wow, what a case of satanic panic if ever I saw one. A real modern day witch hunt. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/The Whispering Woods, where for £2.50 a month you can listen completely ad-free. Or if you are a Whispering Woods listener, for £4.50 a month you can listen to The Whispering Woods and this podcast ad-free. But also on Apple Premium, where for $4.99 a month you can listen to both podcasts ad-free. I want to say a quick thank you to Rog for fact-checking and editing, and as always, stay curious and sleep with the lights on, just in case.
What's it like to care for someone who's sick? To wait for answers, to hope for healing. These are the moments our nation's healthcare teams and their patients face every single day. And it's why we do what we do. We're Siemens Healthineers, and we pioneer breakthroughs in healthcare for everyone, everywhere. Across the country, from rural communities to busy cities, our medical imaging, therapy, and laboratory solutions help providers deliver care that can be smarter, faster, and more precise. With more than 17,000 employees across the United States, we're driving innovations that support healthcare teams, strengthen systems, and truly change people's lives. Because for us, it's about more than technology, more than innovation. It's a promise, built for generations. Siemens Healthineers.
Pura is the smart way to fragrance your home. Customize your scents with app control, schedule them to fit your life, and enjoy premium fragrances that last. And here's something to celebrate. When you start today, your first fragrance is free. It's the perfect time to discover why everyone's switching to Pura. But hurry, this offer is for a limited time only. Go now to Pura.com and claim your free set before it's gone.